In a quiet Ohio town, 28-year-old Heather Christina Bogle clocked out from her overnight shift at the Whirlpool plant and vanished into the morning darkness. When she never arrived to pick up her daughter, something she would never fail to do, panic set in at what began as a missing persons search spiraled into a chilling mystery. Soon, a shocking discovery inside the trunk of her car would expose a brutal crime and a deeply flawed investigation that targeted an innocent man. While the real predator lived just minutes away, it would take new detectives, fresh eyes, and hard science to uncover the truth buried beneath obsession, corruption, and lies. This is the haunting story of a devoted mother whose life was violently stolen, and the dangerous man investigators should have seen from the start. No lies. Be sure to subscribe. It's totally free and just lets you know when I post new cases. Heather Bogle was born in Rock Hill, South Carolina, but later the family moved to Ohio and settled down there. She attended Tiffin Columbian High School, from which she graduated in 2006. Heather also had a daughter named Mackenzie, whom she gave birth to in 2010. We don't know who the father was, whether he knew about the pregnancy or not, and whether he was in her life or not, supporting the child. But regardless, Heather was a very happy single mom of an equally adorable little girl, and she absolutely loved her small family at the time of the case. Heather actually worked at Whirlpool in Clyde, Sandusky County. It was a huge factory that made hundreds of thousands of home appliance parts, and Heather loved it there. But she also had dreams of entering the field of medicine one day. Shortly, she wanted to become a nurse. So, at the time of the case, Heather had enrolled in some nursing courses and was quickly working towards her dream job. But while working at Whirlpool, something caught Heather's eye, or rather, someone. Was her co-worker at the Whirlpool factory, Carmela Badillo. No sooner than they met, Heather was falling head over heels for Carmela. After a while, the two went on a few dates, and before they knew it, had been seeing each other for a year. So, Heather was at a good point in her life. She was working, she was in a relationship, she had a wonderful family, she was studying to become a nurse, and she was so close to achieving her goal. But Heather's nice life was about to get shaken up. And in a very rapid turn of events, her life was about to take a very, very dark turn. Body in the trunk, body in the tian. So Heather and Carmela, after a year of dating, were on the verge of breaking up, and understandably. And Heather took this really hard. Carmela was Heather's love, and while we didn't know what led to the two breaking up, we only know that it was painful. They were fighting constantly to the point where certain words were spoken that one just can't take back. All of this, for the most part, came out of nowhere. To those outside their relationship, it very much seemed like everything was fine one minute, and then it wasn't. Well, Heather had to put her heartbreak on hold because she had also failed one of her nursing exams. This meant that she had to retake the class she failed, which in turn meant that she wouldn't be granted her nursing license and would not be out even more money, putting her dream career on hold for that much longer. Life was really throwing lemons in Heather's way. Things were falling apart, and you know that feeling when things just don't work out in your professional or private life, and you're hit with that massive dose hopelessness? Well, let's just say Heather was right at that spot during that time, right in the thick of it. She couldn't see her way out, and everywhere she turned, her life was a wreck. But Heather was tougher than you think. She was still standing tall, smiling, and going to work because, well, that's what you have to do when life kicks you down. You get back up and start over. Again and again and again. Heather was working her way through these curveballs, and despite everything she'd been going through, she was excited for what life had in store for her. But she didn't expect what happened next. It was April 9th, 2015, and for Heather, it was a workday coming to an end. On this day, she clocked out of work at around 6 a.m., and she was ready to go home. Heather usually worked the night shifts, and then when she got home and hit the hay, she would wake up just in time to pick her daughter, Mackenzie, up from school that afternoon. On this particular day, Heather was seen on CCTV leaving the Whirlpool Clyde plant at around 6:17 a.m. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Heather didn't seem scared, and no one sketchy was following her. But soon, Heather didn't show up at school to pick Mackenzie up. This was really odd. I mean, if anyone can tell you anything about Heather, it's the fact that she was a devoted mom. And I know even moms need breaks sometimes, but if Heather made some change in plans, then she would at least ask someone from her family to go and pick Mackenzie up. She definitely wouldn't have left her daughter alone at school without telling her that she wouldn't be able to pick her up, that IT wasn't like her. This really worried everyone. And later that day, after not being able to reach Heather all day, the 28-year-old single mom was reported missing. The police got down to searching for Heather, and within a day, they found something. But it would be anything but good. See, on April 10th, just a day after Heather had disappeared, her car was found. It was found really close to the Whirlpool plant where she worked, and it looked abandoned. The police were honestly dreading searching inside the car because, well, they just had a bad feeling. But bad feelings don't mean you get to just turn the other way. And investigators knew what they had to do. As soon as they approached the car, it was an all-hands-on-deck situation. They were searching every square inch of this vehicle. But it took them only a matter of minutes to find what they were looking for. But certainly not what they had hoped for. As they popped the trunk lid of the vehicle. Inside the trunk lay an unconscious, motionless, and battered Heather. She was tragically not breathing. But here's the thing. Heather looked different. Her previously beautiful, long hair was chopped off. Hacked, if you will. It was done so haphazardly, and it didn't take a lot to realize that someone had done it in anger. Fury. Heather was also wearing a ridiculously oversized Mickey Mouse shirt. And when the police lifted the shirt, they noticed that there was much more to the horrific attack on Heather. This was worse than anyone expected. It was just such a brutal and horrific sight, even for the police. But what really made the whole situation all the more eerie was that the shirt had no holes in it, which you would think would be bizarre, considering she was attacked with a firearm. But the police soon realized that Heather was likely taken out elsewhere, and she was then placed in this Mickey Mouse shirt after the fact. This was just downright weird. What would be the purpose of this? Someone had taken their sweet time with Heather, post-mortem, and it was such an unsettling scene. But the bigger question was, who had done this to Heather, and why? Flawed investigation. A flawed investigation in Heather's case was taken over by a detective named Sean O'Connell. Now, typically, when I call out detectives by name, it's to commend them for what they've done or to congratulate them on some sort of amazing effort they made to get a case solved. But that's not going to be true this time. At the crime scene, the detectives tried to swab the entire car for any DNA evidence, and they did find it on Heather's body, her cuticles, to be exact. But the weird thing is, I'm not sure how they did this, because Heather's fingers weren't found with the rest of her body. But however this played out, there was DNA under her cuticles. This DNA becomes important later on. So just remember that a toxicology report also stated that Heather had a legal substance in her system. More on that later as well. Now, Detective Sean, the lead investigator in Heather's case, decided to speak to people around the area where Heather's car was found. It was found in the Somerton apartment complex, and from the looks of it, Heather had no business being there. But Sean had his eyes on a suspect already. It was another single mom living in the apartment. Her name was Kinona Bohr. She was 25, and what made her a prime suspect, or at least a person of interest, in Heather's case and in Sean's eyes was the fact that A, she suspiciously / coincidentally owned a similar oversized Mickey Mouse shirt as found on Heather's body, and B, a man named Omar Satchel was at Kinona's apartment and had already been arrested by Sean on firearm and home invasion charges. Oh, and C, Kinona had made some cryptic Facebook posts the same day Heather went missing. Now, Sean had associated Omar with stealing a firearm, apparently the same one used on Heather, and also with a white SUV that was seen between 1:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the same area where Heather's car was found. How much truth was in these associations, though? We don't know. It was all Sean's gut telling him this. Sean had also previously arrested Kinona's boyfriend and imprisoned him for 10 years on illegal substance charges. Also, when the police talked to Kinona, she was emotionless with her answers, as if she couldn't have cared less. So, to Sean, all of this was suspicious. But also, Sean knew these people well, and he didn't trust them. But what about the DNA evidence? Well, this is where Sean thought that his spidey senses were enough, and that he didn't need DNA to, I don't know, confirm whether the people he's suspicious of are even the perpetrators or not. So, when the DNA was eventually tested, it matched neither Kinona, Omar, nor the other guy Sean was suspicious of by the name of Carrie Jeffrey. Not even Kinona's boyfriend's DNA matched the evidence found on Heather's body. But regardless, for the next year or so, Sean made the lives of these people a living hell. Kinona's home was raided. They were questioned ruthlessly, and even the public was frowning at Sean's actions. Because whether any of these people were guilty or not, this all just seemed too excessive when Sean, nor his team, had any evidence against these people. The DNA evidence didn't match up to them. They weren't the perpetrators, plain and simple. It was all Sean's theory about the firearm and the SUV being linked to Kinona and her gang. But Sean was relentless. It's one thing that a detective is doing her job, but it's another to harass people, especially those who are innocent. Well, Sean wasn't the best detective on the block either. He had a pretty bad reputation for being a lousy detective, not following up with leads, and just making his way by bulldozing potential theories and leads with his own bright ideas. He basically loved pointing fingers at anyone who he didn't like or thought was suspicious in his eyes. The eyes of the law can go take a hike for all he cared. So you can tell that he was a wonderful investigator, and Heather's case was in great hands. I don't even know why he was even given the case in the first place. This would all go on for 2 years. All the while, Heather's family was reeling from her loss, begging for answers, while Sean was insistent to keep barking up the same tree. Needless to say, her case was at a standstill, and it would take quite some time before investigators found another lead that would finally send the case forward. New eyes. New leads, new eyes. New leads. After 2 years, new detectives were handed Heather's case, and they had to start from square one. Major Nick Katsopoulos, the new lead detective for Heather's case, was a breath of fresh air from police heaven. He was the person who should have handled the case from the start. First, Detective Nick revisited all of the previous leads, and this time he actually ruled persons of interest out using DNA evidence, which is the right way to do things. That he re-questioned Carmela, as well as other people close to Heather, including her own brother, with whom Heather had a really bad argument before her murder. But, again, they were all cleared off suspicion. Then, Nick checked Heather's movement through her phone as well as satellite data from Google. And lo and behold, he found something that Sean totally missed all those years ago. Heather's phone had pinged near a trailer park that was a couple of minutes away from the Whirlpool factory she worked at. This was really odd. He worked with Heather at the same Whirlpool plant in Clyde. Moreover, he worked the same shift as Heather on the night she went missing. But what would Heather have been doing at this man's house, especially when she was supposed to be getting some sleep so that she could pick up her daughter later on? Well, detectives were about to find out. Catching the killer, Daniel was called into the station for a round of questioning. And when detectives questioned him and asked if he knew Heather at all, he said that he knew who Heather was, but they rarely ever interacted. Daniel went on to say that he may have said a few words to Heather every 2 to 3 months or so, but when the detective asked for a DNA swab, Daniel refused right away. It's not like he was obligated to give a DNA sample, but his hesitation and the fact that Heather's phone pinged close to his trailer were enough for the police to obtain a search warrant. Well, they did obtain that warrant, and this time, he couldn't say no to providing a DNA sample. When it was cross-matched with the one found on Heather's body, it was a 100% match. Daniel's DNA was found on Heather's body. What are the odds? Daniel, a man who worked with Heather but didn't know her personally and seldom talked to her, had his DNA found in her car and on her body. There was definitely more to Daniel than he was letting on. When the results came out, there was no more waiting. Honestly, it was a long time coming for the police as well as Heather's loved ones, who wanted answers for why she was murdered so horrifically. Daniel Myers was immediately taken into custody, and he was charged with aggravated murder, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. It turned out that Daniel, in fact, knew a lot about Heather. He was actually infatuated with her. In fact, on the day Heather disappeared and never came back home, it is believed that Daniel had caught Heather in a very vulnerable state. She had just failed her nursing board exam, and she was on the verge of a really bad breakup with the first woman she ever loved. So, Daniel took advantage of this situation, and he persuaded Heather to go back with him to his apartment and vent about her problems. But that is not what happened. See, when Daniel and Heather got to his trailer and took some illegal substances to let loose, that was when Daniel advanced towards Heather. Heather, clearly not interested in men, let alone Daniel, rejected his advances, and in the process, she supposedly laughed at him for even making a pass at her. But these are just his words. Whether this is true We don't know. And even if it is true, we don't know the full context. Was it a friendly life, like, haha, bro, I'm gay, what are you doing? Or was she ridiculing him? Well, it doesn't matter. Because whatever the intention was, Daniel wasn't about to let it slide, and he quite literally saw red. Daniel pounced on Heather, and he had one goal in mind, to finish Heather off for good. But Heather put up a fight. She fought hard to try and get Daniel off her, but she was unsuccessful. She suffered a lot of defensive wounds on her arms, but Daniel wasn't letting up. In the end, Daniel did a serious number on Heather, and finally used a firearm to finish the job. He then undressed her, placed her in the oversized Mickey Mouse shirt, and loaded Heather's body into the trunk of her own car and abandoned it near the Whirlpool plant. Daniel literally murdered an innocent woman who didn't want to reciprocate his advances. Also, I want to talk about this laugh that Daniel found oh so mocking that I want to disclaim that this is what I personally assume happened. Heather was not looking for a relationship. It's what her family said time and time again that I personally think that when Daniel came on to Heather, she didn't know what to do, and she gave him an awkward, hey no, I'm not interested in you, laugh while putting her hand up to stop Daniel from doing whatever he was about to do, hoping to defuse the situation. A lot of people laugh nervously during awkward moments. It's very common to reject someone's advances with a smile to make light of a very uncomfortable situation. Now, I wasn't there to witness what happened, but I just don't believe that Heather barked a laugh in Daniel's face because she thought that he was unattractive or something. She wasn't a mean person. Heather was in a weird place mentally, and the last thing she needed was a middle-aged dude making passes at her. Well, in the end, Daniel Myers was taken to court, and if he was found guilty, then he would likely be given the death penalty, which left poor Daniel shaking in his boots. I always say this, but what is it with criminals, especially murderers, who have no regard for the lives of others, but when it comes to their own lives? I mean, I just don't get it.so. In the end, Daniel pleaded guilty to all of the charges, and there was no trial. At his sentencing, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole in February 2019. As a reward for cooperating with the detectives and prosecutors, he was emotionless, stoic, and completely unfazed while Heather's loved ones were crying their hearts out as the details were said aloud in court. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he just said, "I have nothing to say." But here's the real kicker. Heather's murder was not believed to be his first rodeo. After his arrest in Heather's case, about 10 women came forward and told the police that Daniel was a piece of human garbage who habitually took advantage of innocent, vulnerable women. When Daniel's trailer was searched, several women's undergarments and inappropriate videos of Daniel with other women were found. This man was literal human scum. Also, he was suspected by several people when his then-girlfriend, Lee Suter, was found with a single firearm injury to her chest in the trailer Daniel lived in 2009 that Lee was found in the bedroom with the firearm right beside her. Ironically, Lee also worked at Whirlpool at the time, and even though it was Daniel who reported her death to the police, Lee's sister suspected Daniel from the get-go. She stressed that her sister would never come close to a firearm because she hated them so much. Also, Lee couldn't pull the trigger by herself because the firearm was a rifle. It was long, and it just seemed implausible for Lee to choose this specific method to end her own life. Even Daniel knew that Lee despised firearms, yet there was one in their home. Daniel claimed that it was for her protection, but her sister doesn't think so. Lee's case was reopened once again because detectives believed that it wasn't handled the way it should have been, and it should have been treated as a homicide to begin with. But in the end, the investigation went nowhere, and Lee's passing was officially ruled as her trying to end her own life.so. It is highly possible, although not proved, that Daniel might have taken the lives of people before, and even if he hasn't, then he has surely made women's lives miserable at the very least. This man is seriously in the perfect place now, behind bars and not in the outside world. Sentencing of Sean terrorizing women and murdering them when they don't give him what he wants. That sentencing of SM before Daniel was sentenced in Heather's case. Someone else was due to appear in court, and it was Sean O'Connell. For 15 months. He was after 3 people, Kinona Bohr, Carrie Jeffrey, and Omar Satchel. Sean was adamant that these people had something to do with Heather's murder. His theory entailed that Heather visited Kinona and Carrie for illegal substances, and on that fateful day, the trio murdered Heather over said illegal substances. What proof did he have? Absolutely nothing. He didn't even bother telling the prosecution office that the DNA found on Heather's body didn't match anyone from the trio he hadn't even peeked into. Heather's cell phone records, something that Detective Nick did right away, and to make matters worse, when he was on Heather's case, records showed that they actually received an email from a woman who worked at Whirlpool, and she had actually given information on a man who worked at Whirlpool who could have been responsible for Heather's murder. This man in question was Daniel Myers. See, this woman had also been a target of Daniel. In the email she had sent O'Shawn, she said that she was attacked by him at his trailer, but luckily she managed to escape and that the detective should look into him. This woman literally gave Detective Sean information about Daniel on a silver platter. If Sean could have looked the other way for a second and stopped his obsession with pinning crimes on innocent people, Heather's case would have been solved years ago. But did he do that? Well, he obviously didn't, as I'm sure you know by now. After all was said and done, Sean was charged with obstructing official business, dereliction of duty, coercion, unauthorized use of property, tampering with physical evidence. This person handled Heather's case is just appalling. Well, in the end, he struck a plea deal, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison in September 2018. 2 years. When asked by the judge during his trial about the email that the woman had sent him about Daniel Myers, Sean claimed that he wasn't a technology-savvy person, and he also denied ever getting that email to begin with. This man's defense was, quite literally, that he didn't know how to properly use his email. In 2015, a lead detective didn't know how to open an email. Sure, thankfully, Sean was finally forced to pay for his crimes. He obviously lost his job, then went to prison, but there hasn't really been any mention of what happened to him after that. He basically faded into obscurity, where he belongs. After everything played out, I think the outcome for this case was about as good as anyone could have hoped for. But it sure would have been great if it had come sooner. But thanks to the actions of one man and one terrible detective, this family had to not only suffer the unbearable loss of an innocent woman like Heather, but their suffering was needlessly drawn out. All because one man couldn't keep his ego in check.